Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Honourable Member from Abbotsford for sharing his time with me today. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to add my voice on behalf of the people of Lakeland to the debate regarding the government's proposed mission against ISIL. This is among our most solemn and critical responsibilities. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces for their determination and for their bravery. I would also like to thank the Royal Canadian Air Force pilots and crew for their critical work and progress in the fight against ISIL. Mr. Speaker, as Canadians express their strong and steadfast appreciation to the thousands of men and women who continue to put their lives on the line to fight for freedom and for human rights, the Liberal government's approach is incoherent. It seems to not only lack the proper consideration and evidence required for these types of tactical military decisions, but it's also devoid of common sense. We should be forthright about the true evil that Canada and our allies are fighting. ISIL are extremist, barbaric terrorists who are executing unspeakable atrocities against innocent and vulnerable people. They are carrying out a systematic extermination of people who are ethnic and religious minorities in Syria and Iraq and the larger region with bigger aspirations. They do not think twice about beheading Western journalists, aid workers, and students while filming their terror to proliferate their campaign of hate and fear. They are trafficking and raping thousands of women and using young child sex slaves for their own personal and perverted pleasure. They want to conquer the world by killing any and all religions that support democracy and any individual, group, or ideology with whom or with which they disagree. They force their views on others by recruiting the weak and exploiting the vulnerable. They use whatever and whomever they need to in order to further their own agenda and at any cost. We cannot pretend we don't know. The world has witnessed the true devastation that ISIL leaves in its wake, ravaging entire regions with mass executions, beheadings, torture, and cultural genocide. The events that transpired in Paris last November will be forever etched in our minds. The sheer terror that rippled through the streets of the world's most romantic city, killing at least 130 people, that reached all corners of the world as it precipitated a series of coordinated attacks on the rest of the civilized world. Suicide bombers have attacked innocent civilians in Turkey, Lebanon, Tunisia, and others. In October 2015, a Russian Metrojet was bombed, killing 224 people. In December 2015, a couple opened fire on a holiday party at a center for people with disabilities in San Bernardino, California. 14 people died. These are just some of the unfathomable acts that ISIL perpetrates. It's only a sliver of their horrendous terrorism. We, as Canadians, here in the most admired country in the world, have never turned our backs on vulnerable people, victims of atrocities, blatant terrorism, and acts of war. We have always stood with our allies and punched above our weight in military campaigns against evil, in defense of human rights, and to ensure our own safety and security. Hear, hear. Take, for example, Canada's role in Afghanistan. For 13 years, brave members of our Canadian Armed Forces contributed to stabilizing one of the world's poorest countries, rife with political instability, human rights abuses, and a bleak economy. Today, Afghan girls proudly attend school. Afghan security forces are providing safety and security to their people, and the economy is moving in the right direction. Standing with our allies to defend and to provide opportunities and hope for people in regions devastated by terrorism, people under attack, is the right thing to do. It's the Canadian thing to do. As my colleague, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, has said recently, it seems the Liberal government doesn't really understand the true nature of terrorism. They're not just thugs, as the Prime Minister has said. They're not simply organized criminals, as the Minister of Natural Defence has asserted. Terrorism aims to destroy everything we as Canadians believe in, our very way of life. Right. Equality, the rule of law, democracy, freedom, human rights, acceptance, diversity, and self-determination. Mr. Speaker, I believe wholeheartedly that Canada has an obligation to protect our rights and freedoms and those of our allies. As a stable and democratic country, we must fight terror. ISIL has also named, targeted, and threatened Canada and Canadians directly. An ISIL-motivated murderer killed one of our soldiers in 2014. In a November 2014 audio recording, ISIL's leader said the group will fight to the last man. He specifically singled out Canada and other Western countries as stumbling between fear, weakness, inability, and failure. In November 2015, a magazine published by ISIL called for jihadi fighters in Western countries, including Canada, to, quote, rise and defend your state from your place wherever you may be. In fact, some Canadians have been recruited by ISIL and have made threats against our own country. In a video release, Farah Sheridan said he had a message to his home country of Canada. He said, "We are coming and we will destroy you. We will bring you slaughter." And John McGuire, who urged ISIL sympathizers to carry out lone wolf attacks on Canadians' targets in a video released by ISIL. Mr. Speaker, while our allies are stepping up, Canada is stepping back. The Liberals' changes to Canada's mission against ISIL are at best short-sighted and at worst inconceivable. As we send hundreds more military trainers into a war zone, we've pulled our skilled and very successful CF-18 fighter jets from their role of providing much-needed protection. Once a well-respected and integral ally, Canada is now abandoning our full-fledged participation to other countries like the United States, France, and Australia, who have committed to defeating this threat against all of us. While no real tactical answer has been provided as to why the decision was made to pull our CF-18s from the fight against ISIL, we know for certain this was a political decision by the Liberal government to meet an arbitrary campaign promise even before this debate today. My Conservative colleagues and I are grateful for the contributions and progress of the Royal Canadian Air Force pilots and crew in the critical fight against ISIL. They have made a difference. We agree with a multi-pronged approach, including humanitarian aid, providing refuge for vulnerable people here in Canada, and training local forces. All were undertaken by the previous government. But who is going to protect and support our men and women on the ground? If we do not participate in this combat mission, we will be dropping humanitarian aid on dead bodies. Our international partners have asked us to stay in the air combat mission. Victims of terrorism have asked us to stay. The Conservative Party has asked the government to maintain our air combat contribution. These pleas are falling on deaf ears. While the government has already pulled our CF-18s out of this mission before the conclusion of the debate here in the House, I strongly urge them to reevaluate and to prioritize the safety and security of the people they are putting on the ground and of all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, as Canadians, we will always be committed to upholding human rights, religious freedoms, and the rule of law. These principles are fundamental to our Canadian identity. Standing with our allies to fight terrorism with all means necessary is the Canadian thing to do. Thank you.